Hello and welcome to another episode of Casting Views, the podcast that takes a topic each week and, as the name suggests, cast views. This week, I've got a good friend of the show, and I'd like to say good friend of mine. Well, we'll see what he says. I've got Satsu from Chatsunami podcast on. Hiya.
We'll talk about it after the PayPal payment goes through, But
Yeah, that
No,
hasn't cleared yet. That hasn't cleared yet.
yeah.
How are you doing? How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Always a pleasure to be back on Casting Views. It's always the highlight of my podcasting recording week whenever I see the notification and you say, "Oh, do you want to come on for an episode?" And I go, "You know what? That sounds like a delightful idea. Let's do it."
No, it's always good to have you on. And I normally say when I get people back on the show after sort of like the first episode or so, that it'll always be something outside of their normal, I want to say comfort zone, but outside their normal sphere of podding. But this week's episode, which we'll come on to after, is something in your world. But I think it fits both of ours. And I don't know if it'd be normally something you describe on your episode. So again, you felt like the natural person to get on for this one.
Yeah, as I've said before, I am a very indecisive person when it comes to topics. And even when I was talking about it, I think a couple of weeks ago, about, being a podcaster and the things I've done in the past, I was like, you know what? I've just realised I am completely indecisive. So I do gaming, films, I just do everything. So yeah, no, I know what you mean. And I'm glad that you thought of me when you brought up this topic in particular.
Excellent. We will get into it, but I wanted to mention a couple of things first. And I said, hope it's not going to embarrass you. You've mentioned to me, because we do talk quite a bit via Twitter, and you have put it out there. So to be fair, it shouldn't be a total surprise. You've released a book recently, haven't you?
I have indeed.
So
E-
I want you to tell people, because first, sorry, I was going to say, firstly, absolutely fantastic. Congratulations. I think, people that do that, it's just amazing. And yes, so do you want to talk about it a bit?
yeah, well, first of all, thank you for the lovely words on that. Yeah, it was actually during university, which I wish I could say, oh, that was a couple of years ago, but no, it's closer to 9, 10 years ago when I first released this. I was naive. I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to do this and that. And then when I released it, I didn't really know what I was doing at the time, so I kind of fell down the wayside. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to get back into it, but. With podcasting and being able to talk to people, being able to share different ideas with people, yourself especially, because I know you get a lot of messages from me being like, "Oh, should I do this? Should I do that?" Um, yeah, I decided to write a book called Canvas. It's really a sci-fi book. Well, I would say sci-fi fantasy because I'm also a big Warhammer 40k fan that kind of mixes those kind of things together. It's not really like Warhammer, but in terms of genre, and yeah, it's kind of a little bit like the Matrix as well. It's about the tell me if you've heard this one. The Earth has gone kaput. And lots of people end up uploading themselves to a virtual world called Canvas, and initially it's like a big utopia, and then suddenly bad things start to happen. People are worried, they need to find out what's going wrong. It's almost a bit like, and I have to admit, I've been absolutely binge listening to your Black Mirror episodes. It reminds me of, episodes like San Junipero or White Christmas, where you get people uploading themselves onto like these virtual worlds. It's really taken a while for me to get back into it and actually have, well, I suppose the courage to republish it. So I'm really excited to hear what people have to say about it. And the good news is, if you don't like it and you buy the paperback, then it is thick enough to use for other purposes. So if you want to use it as a doorstop, if you want to throw it at my head or at my window, feel free. For legal reasons, that's a joke.
It is a hefty book, and I mean that in a positive sense. It is an incredible thing you've done. And like I said, when you said you've written a book, and then I seen the picture, it is a novel. You've written a novel.
Yeah, the only issue I have to say with it is, for anyone who doesn't know, I initially had published it on a website called Lulu.com, and
Oh yeah.
that's like a site where you can basically write your book and then publish it. They're basically like a printing company, and initially it was all good there, but when I went to rewrite bits of it and republish it again, there was some issues with the way that you could actually put up the manuscript and things. It was really weird. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to give into the dark side and go to Amazon and give them a go this time. But because of their margins, the book went from roughly 400 to 500 pages to about 700. So
Wow. Yeah.
if you do buy this book, I apologise in advance. Blame Amazon. Please don't blame me. Please blame them. So yeah.
I've managed to get a copy digitally, legally, I think I should say, because that sounds quite dodgy. So, and I've got some time off coming up, so I'm really looking forward to getting into it. And like I said, look, without wanting to really inflate your ego, but no, honestly, congratulations. I've got actually, I was going to say I've had a guest on, but his episode it still hasn't come out at the time of recording. He's written a book as well, and obviously, Sugar Coated Murder, they've written a book. I just think it's amazing, because I said to this guest I said many years ago, I entertained a notion of, oh, I want to write a book. And then you start thinking, and all I could think of was something really cheesy, something really corny. And that was if I was lucky enough to be able to think of anything at all, because you start getting the blanks. So no, I think it's incredible to put something together and actually see it out there in the wild.
I mean, that is the only issue with self-publishing it, is the fact that you publish it, you look at it and you think, okay, that bit could be better. So you're always like updating it, editing it, and you're like, oh God, I hope people like this. If they don't, that 3 years that I've built up, building up my reputation as like a podcaster, I'm like, yeah, no, I'm a nice person. And then they're like, no, I've read your book. This is horrible. So, but yeah, no, thank you for that.
And we were talking before, people should be able to get it when this episode goes out, shouldn't they? But ultimately, I think watch your Twitter feed, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And obviously send me the links, etc., and I'll put it in show notes.
Oh, thank you.
That's number one. And the other thing we can't really talk about, so we're kind of teasing a little bit, but you've been working on something else special as well, haven't you? Which will be announced at some point in the future.
Yeah, so hopefully that will be announced at the very end of the year. I am very excited. The announcement date's a wee bit loosey goosey. I'm kind of debating between sometime between Christmas and New Year's Eve, because I really want to start, building up. I was about to say suspense, not suspense, but I suppose that's what I'm doing now. But yeah, I want to build up some hype around it. There are a great number of podcasters who are involved in this. It's going to be a project where I am very excited to hopefully be injecting, well, I say injecting more positivity into the indie podcast community, but let's face it, that's like me putting a cherry on top of like a positivity cake, because it's already as positive as it can be. But yeah, I'm hoping with this group project, which of course I'm involved in, you're involved in, you've had to suffer weeks of me bouncing ideas off you as well, being like, oh, can you help me with this or that? What do you think? So,
I've loved it.
oh, it's honestly, I am so excited to see where it goes, and yeah, to see what work comes out of it. So yeah, watch this space,
Watch your
definitely.
space. I think, like we said, very vague, but possibly 2023, but definitely 2024, right?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Actually, and just generally, how Chatsunami going? I mean, this should be the first weekend in December, hopefully. So, got plans much for December festive period for the pod?
Well, I wish I could say I was taking it easy, because last week we celebrated our 3 year anniversary. Yeah, we did a review on the Dungeons and Dragons film as a celebration, because I feel as if Dungeons and Dragons was our first topic that we started the podcast on. So it's almost become a kind of informal tradition that we have to talk about Dungeons and Dragons in some form. We also had the Chats of Shorts episode last Wednesday as well. There's some nice juicy Patreon content going out, as well as a book release. But for December, Oh, I wish I could say I was taking it easy, and I'm wondering if you're going to be the same because we're going to be doing like a lot of Christmas reviews for mainly films, to be honest, because it's really difficult to find a really good Christmas game, that's not like a
Yeah,
bootleg
yeah,
or, Santa's gone missing, Santa's got a shotgun,
yeah.
all the family friendly games. But yeah, we're mainly going to be focusing on a lot of Christmas films. So if you don't like Christmas films, you're probably not going to have a good time this month. But if you do, then yeah, definitely stop by with your hot chocolate, your candy canes, all your chocolate, your tin of roses. That's a very British
Oh,
thing as
the
well.
roses, yeah,
Yeah.
quality street roses. Now
Oh,
it's all
yeah.
heroes and celebrations, though, isn't it?
They're not the same. Like, I
Not the
love
same.
celebrations, but you don't open a thing of celebrations at Christmas. It has
Yeah.
to be like a tin of roses, or as you say, Quality Street, and the fact they're overcharging for like the metal tins now. Oh god! But that's a story for another day.
Yeah, that's
But what?
yeah,
Yeah,
shrinkflation coming soon.
yeah.
Yeah, 2024. No, for me, I'm not doing anything specifically. Do you know what? I'm actually, yeah, I'm not going to do anything specifically Christmassy for the pod. A couple of episodes will have possibly some Christmassy elements to it. I've got the content already planned out, and you know what you said about sort of that, how it goes with taking a break. And you and I have often said about maybe needing to take a break. This podcast here is podcast one of four I'm doing in the next 4 days. So I've got my work cut out for me this week. So yeah, scheduling it needs to get better in 24, I think. But also we will get into the show shortly. I'm also testing something out on this recording tonight as well. So I won't go into names, but I was telling you all about the technical issues I'd had recently and some of the editing woes I'd had recently, right?
Oh yes. With they who must not be named. Yeah.
One part of it was possibly my fault. I'm actually trying something new tonight as well. So I'm trying a soundboard out. So just to put in the intro, the outro, and the ad. But yeah, I thought, why not have a soundboard? Yeah, so get ready for loads of random noises throughout the episode, people.
I'm not gonna lie, I jumped out my skin there. Jesus.
well,
Oh,
be prepared. Be prepared for the rest of it.
who
But
needs horror films when you got a soundboard? Jeez, oh.
I've got a new toy. This is it. I've got the biggest smile on my face, which I know doesn't transmit to people back home in terms of you can't see it. But yeah, this is going to be my new plaything for the rest of the year. Tell you what, let's start cracking on. So we'll go into an advert soon. On the other side of the break, we're going to talk about gaming scandals, outrages, controversies, aren't we?
Oh yeah, I can't wait for this. I'm always ready to punch at these controversies.
So the times when gaming companies, or even the gaming community cause outrage. Oh, is this sorry? No, that's all I've got for this episode. I'm sorry. Let's play an ad, and that's why I said I'd have you on for this because it is video game related. And as this is video game related, let's hear from Slade, Joey, and Tim over at the Game Club Pod.
Join me, Tim, and my co-hosts
Slade and Joey
at the Game Club podcast, where once every 2 weeks we review video games not too dissimilar from a book club. Find us on all your favourite podcast providers.
I love those guys. I really do.
Oh, same.
And something I'm going to do, I've started with them, and I'm actually, I was going to warn you to do the same. Well, warn you just because you might see it, is I've gone back to the beginning. So I'm listening to their early episodes, and I'll be doing the same to yours as well. It is funny. Some of the things they're doing in their initial episodes has had me creasing up.
Well, I apologise in advance for that.
No. Right. So as I said before that ad, we're going to talk about scandals, outrages, controversies. Now, in the previous episode, I have touched on some controversies, but my ones, I'm not sure what you've bought. I've actually gone for ones that aren't necessarily the big, huge, obvious, violent games, etc. Although my first one might contradict that. I've kind of gone for some of the ones I've remembered, but on the face of it now, probably seem quite innocuous, but at the time did cause outrage amongst the communities. So I think gaming has been synonymous with outrage, hasn't it, throughout its life?
Oh, 100%. And I think that is the problem nowadays with gaming. The fact that, I mean, when I suppose you and I were growing up, gaming was a little bit more niche. Like it was starting to broaden out, but by the end of the 2000s, and the fact that gaming is a very popular pastime, it's no longer this niche thing. You're going to get other people from different backgrounds saying, "Oh, I like this," or "Oh, I think this is terrible." And I mean, between that and gaming companies not understanding how to appeal to those audiences, I think it's like oil and water. They do not mix at times.
And I think it's definitely changed in that before, and I can't tell you a time frame of when what I mean by before, but it was more about the games being shocking or outrageous. You still get that now. Hello, Call of
Hmm.
Duty and Grand Theft Auto. But whereas now a lot more of the scandal outrage seems to come, as you said, from the gaming companies themselves, doesn't it? The majority
Oh,
of the time.
oh yeah, you've got your Blizzard, Activisions, and companies like that. You've got your rock stars. You've got companies that essentially, I mean, if they're not embroiled in, the latest scandal of mistreating their employees, it's all about crunch culture. It's about this
Yeah.
or that.
Yeah.
It's quite surprising in this day and age that companies like that haven't, had a word with themselves, to borrow a very Scottish phrase there, to have a word with themselves and be like, come on, we have to be better. But, money talks and all that, I suppose.
So, and we will get into our examples, but
Oh,
do
yeah.
you think that gaming though is an easy target for scandals because, or even outrage because it is such a broad appeal? It's in everyone's homes. It's not the case, but for a lot of people, they see it as mainly being aimed at children. It does now span a whole age range. So, there are games obviously aimed at the adult market, but games more so now than ever are going to be played by young kids, those violent games. I mean, look, it was a case when I was younger, but the violence in them and the look of them was a lot less graphic and severe than they are nowadays. Do you think basically gaming is just an easy target or an easy environment for these kind of stories to come out of?
I think, yes, it is still an easy target, but I don't think it's as bad as it used to be. It actually reminds me of when I was growing up in like the 90s, early 2000s. One of the ones, not so much for me in Scotland, but I know in America there was like the Satanic Panic. I know that was about D&D, but there was also the Satanic Panic about things like Pokemon and how that was going to come through your TV and steal your children's souls and things. You had the obvious ones like Grand Theft Auto and games that were like ultra violent, your Mortal Kombats that people were absolutely outraged at and think of the children. I think nowadays it's less the case that a lot of people are more relaxed compared to what they used to be, but I don't think it's necessarily stopped as such. Like, I remember when I was younger seeing, and this was years and years ago, but I remember seeing this mum and her child who couldn't have been older than 10. And the wee boy picked up this copy of Battlefield, I think it was Battlefield, 19 something, or I can't remember, but no, it was Bad Company. That was it. Because have you seen
Okay.
this cover where it's like a grenade with a smiley face on it? I remember seeing this boy pick it up, and then he looked at his mum and said, "Mum, can I buy this?" And I was a teenager at the time, and I thought, "Oh, guy, that's never going to happen. The mum's clearly not going to buy it." And of course, lo and behold, she didn't protest. She just took it and went, "Yeah, sure, let's go buy it." And I was like, "Whoa, hold the phone," because I feel as if nowadays parents are a lot more, or I wish I could say for a fact, but I'm not a parent myself, but they do have the resources or rather better resources to see what these kind of games entail. So I think if there is going to be a controversy, the one thing I'll say is I think it's easier for a controversy because of the accessibility of the internet. Because I feel as if nowadays, and I don't know if you agree with this, but it's the fact that the gaming landscape has severely changed. So you've got people who are a lot more hypercritical and they're a lot more negative because, purely for the fact that they can be, but then that drowns out the actual justified critique of these types of games. So yeah, I would say it's twofold. Apologies, that was a long, that was a
No,
long-winded
well,
way to say it was
no,
twofold,
no.
but
Well, it is funny because when I was a kid, my parents weren't necessarily into technology or into sort of the tech I had, but they would get me the computer games or they would get me the computer or the little Game and Watch, things like that. It feels obviously it's changed as people have got older, the gamers have got older. They're into it. When I had Luke from Nerdstalgic, I think his uncle got him into gaming. And so there is now a difference now where more people in a family will be into it. Now, if my parents at the time, though, had been watching me play games, they would have seen blocky graphics on the screen, not doing much. Whereas now, you look at, say, a Grand Theft Auto or, I don't know, like trying to think of another ultra realistic looking game, but like, oh, like Dead Space, that is full on gore, evisceration, and it would be different to looking. Now, my first game, I got a Commodore 64. It came with Rambo First Blood Part 2. And yes, you can call it a violent game. Put that next to Call of Duty. And it's like, I don't know, it's like Disney cartoons against like the Saw films. It's a different time now, isn't it? And that's what I'm saying. I wonder if now people are less shocked by the games and more so by the practice of the industry.
I think you're totally right there. Because funny you should mention that, but I remember my parents being extremely strict about the types of games I could play. And I remember if I was under the age limit of, like, for example, if a game was rated a 15 or an 18, like Grand Theft Auto, my parents wouldn't let me buy it or play it. They were very responsible in that regard. But as soon as I turned 15, it was like unlocking the sweetie shop. I was just right in there. I was like, yep, I'm going to get this shooter game. I'm going to get that shooter game. But I always remember one of my brothers had, I think it was Duke Nukem 64. And I remember he was playing that on the N64, and I was watching him play it. And as you said, it's these kind of blocky graphics nowadays. And I remember my mum coming in and seeing me watch this and absolutely tearing through my brother, being like, "How could you
Really?
let your poor brother watch this violent action and everything?" She was really mad that he let me watch this. And at the time, you look back at these games, and as I said, my parents were very, very responsible in or rather, how I played these games. They wouldn't let me play anything that was going to be too violent or anything, but at the same time, they weren't prohibiting any, as long as they were the appropriate age range. But I feel as if nowadays, even the fact that they are over the top and very graphic, because and this could be a whole episode in itself, so please feel free to jot it down. But there is like quite a real problem with kids getting into the mascot horror genre. Have you heard about this? Like your Five Nights at Freddy's, your
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to think of what else, like Inky and the something, your Poppy's Playtime. It's basically like a colourful character
Yeah.
that clearly is created to appeal to kids, but on the other side, they're built as if they're part of a creepypasta, like a horror story. Like, oh, look, it's just a teddy bear. Oh, no, the teddy bear has fangs and it ripped out someone's throat. And, it's quite disturbing in that regard. So I don't know if it is just like subtle marketing in that regard for some of these games. And granted, that's more for the indie genre of gaming, but yeah, there is definitely still accessibility, and I think that kids nowadays can probably access these games way easier than you and I probably ever could at the same stage of our lives.
Well, this is what I was going to say actually. So I mentioned it a few episodes ago for Halloween when I had Justin from the movie Wire and Matt from Decaying with the Boys. We were talking about horror, and I said, back in the day, you had to get somebody who had the VHS tape for it, and then because you didn't really have TV in your room when I was young, you had to kind of then sneak down or wait till you could get the house to yourself to then watch this horror, or you had to go around to a mate's
Mm-hmm.
house, whatever. But now you can stream it on your phone. Everyone's got TVs in their room everywhere. You've got the streaming channels that show it anyway, any time of day, rather than having to wait till like 11 o'clock at night. It's the same with gaming now. It's all digital. So whereas
Mm-hmm.
before you could have, you said, look at the cover or look at the back cover. Most people probably don't even have game boxes in their house anymore. So a parent wouldn't be able to look at that. They're probably playing it on a TV in their room or on a portable console or whatever. So it's probably gone past the police. I mean, obviously, again, like you, I'm not a parent, but what your parents were doing, well, right, there is an age rating system and it's there for a reason. And you can still do that with digital controls. But I just wonder now if it's almost gone past the point of that for a lot of people just because of how accessible gaming is and how digital it is.
Because it actually reminds me of a game that came out in, I want to say, the late 2000s. It was called, and I actually remember seeing the cover, but I never played it. But it was called Naughty Bear, and it was
Yes,
like,
yes, I played that.
yeah, have you?
Yeah,
Yeah, you know what I
yeah,
mean? Yeah, it's
yeah.
like I watched a walkthrough of it, and I was just so shocked that obviously it's like cuddly bears, and it's juxtaposed by the fact that you're basically eviscerating these poor bears. Yeah, you get games like that where clearly there is a comedic side to it, but it's not really appropriate for kids. Yet, some parents might naively think, oh, right, teddy bear, video game, children, here you go, little Jimmy, enjoy. And then, of course, little Jimmy grows up to be a sociopath, but that's another
See,
story.
see, you're calling games like the Naughty Bear, etc., and Five Nights at Freddy the vaping of the gaming world.
I mean, it's not far off, but that is
No,
actually
I get it. I get it. I get it.
it's a bridge. It's a bridge to another genre. That's all I'll
Yeah,
say.
yeah. Okay, but kind of having said that about sort of modern scandals, I did just want to say this here, and I know I said my examples I remembered, but this
Mhm.
one I don't because it was before I was born. Before anyone makes a smart comment there, I've got that one of the very first video game outrages ever actually came in 1976. So you would
Wow.
think, yeah, what could be wrong? Now, it looks like the first controversial video game debate I could find was one called Death Race. Bear in mind, I think it was an arcade game, but bear in mind it was 1976. So I've seen some pictures, and you can look it up if you do Death Race 1976. It looks like an advanced version of Pong.
Mhm.
It's a black and white stick type graphic. And the objective of the game is to earn points by running over as many gremlins as possible within a given time frame. What apparently though got everyone upset about this game was that you heard a little scream sound when a person got hit and a little gravestone came up. And due to that, there was a public outcry and the manufacturer took the game off the market.
Yeah, I'm looking it up just now, and I can't really fault them. Like, don't get me wrong, compared to nowadays, that's
Yeah,
nothing. But
yeah,
yeah, I can imagine at the time watching like a poor wee pixel person running across
yeah,
the screen, and then a cross pops up to where they died. I'm like,
yeah.
that's actually quite shocking for 1976. I mean, it's not the worst. It's not the worst I've seen,
No,
but yeah, no, that,
it's just interesting that, yeah.
yeah.
So it's almost 50 years in a couple of years' time, and so it just kind of shows as long as gaming's been around, there's been outrage. And the only other thing I was going to say, before I hand over to you for your first talking point, was the ESRB, so the Entertainment Software Rating Board, came into effect in '94. So it actually feels later than I would have thought it would, and I think I've mentioned it on another episode. I think it came into being after Night Trap,
Oh,
the
yes.
F&B game.
Mhm.
So that's only been around since '94. Yes, that's just a very brief little introduction to the first outrage and what's coming to help parents there.
Mhm.
Over to you. What's your first talking point?
So I'm going to kick off with terrible launches of video games, and these ones might be a bit more well known. So I'm leading the audience in soft here, you know.
I want to keep this to 3 hours long, this podcast,
Yeah.
all right?
Uh, oh, please, 3.5. Come on, director's cut. But some of the games that I've grouped together for this are, of course, your Fallout 76, No Man's Sky, Cyberpunk as well. There is another one, but I will leave that point till later. But see, for Fallout 76, I'll start quickly with that one. But have you heard of the controversies around it beyond the fact that when it released, it was just overall buggy?
There's a couple of things, so I'll keep one to myself. But because I used to be a big fan of and still like, even though I don't get them, collector's editions of games. So I
Oh,
know there
yes.
was some uproar about that or the version of that for that game. But yeah, I remember when that came out because I'm a huge Fallout fan.
It is just such a weird. It's a weird series of events. Like, there's a really good content creator called Internet Historian. I don't know if you've ever came across his
I
stuff,
don't
but he
think so, no.
does he does a really good summary of Fallout 76, and funny enough, No Man's Sky as well, where he talks about all the issues in great length, and he does it in like quite a comedic way, so it's fantastic for that. But I mean, some of the stuff, of course, as I said, there was the fact that it was buggy, there was no NPCs, people were using Smurf accounts to basically raid I think it's the dev room. So basically, for anyone who doesn't know, it's like the room where they keep all of the items in. So what they were doing was they were creating like an old account, going in, stealing the stuff, and then they would transfer it to their main account, because what Bethesda were doing was they were targeting anybody. It was like you went in, you got the item, and they would tag your account as if, oh, you've been in here, therefore you're a cheater. So they would permaban you right there and then. But because they were going in with fake accounts, transferring this stuff over and then getting banned, it wasn't really effective. There was also overpriced DLC, which I know is something you'll probably touch on later, where I think you could buy for 500. I think that this kind of leads me on to something else, right enough, because I think they gave players 500 points of their store credit,
That's
like
right,
in the
yes.
game,
Yeah.
because of a particular mess up with one of their collector's editions. And that, of course, was the canvas bag. And the
Yeah,
canvas
that's what I
bag,
was thinking of. That's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah, because apparently they were like, oh, here's this lovely canvas bag that you can buy with this collector's edition. And it does look nice, don't get me wrong, it does look lovely. But then when it actually came out, it was like all plasticky and
It was like
polyester. I think,
nylon,
yeah,
wasn't it? It was like a
nylon, yeah.
nylon mesh
Oh,
bag, wasn't it? Yeah.
it was just ridiculous. It looks nothing like the bag. So they're like, okay, we're sorry. Here's 500 points. And the thing was, you could buy a lightwood laminate for your house in the game, but you couldn't buy the postman's uniform, which came with a canvas bag, ironically. So then, of course, when people were complaining, that led to more issues where people were getting doxxed because, and this was more a Bethesda issue, people were emailing in saying, oh, can you help me with this? And they were raising service tickets. And apparently there was something going on where they essentially had all of those tickets in public view. So anybody
Okay.
could read people's complaints,
Wow.
their email addresses,
Wow.
it's a GDPR nightmare. As someone
Oh,
who works for GDPR, is an absolute nightmare.
yeah.
But the only other thing I can think of is the Nuka-Cola scandal around that. Did you hear about this one?
That's one I've forgotten. I do remember it,
Oh,
but
that
I
basically
recall it, sorry, but I don't remember it. Yeah.
ironically enough, much like them, hey. but but yeah, they were promising this beautiful glass bottle of that world's version of Coca-Cola, Nuka-Cola, and it looked absolutely fantastic, and people were getting impatient because they ordered a special edition that, like, come on, where is it? And then eventually they released like a making of thing. But what they
Okay.
didn't realise was it wasn't a glass bottle because, surprise, surprise, much like the canvas bag, it was too expensive to make. So they basically put a plastic cover over a glass bottle of rum.
Right.
So it was like it was split into two parts, and they put the two bits together. So when
Yeah.
people got it, they were complaining it was flimsy. It wasn't even pouring properly because it was like a second lip, and the liquid was getting caught in it. It was just an absolute spiral of like setback after setback. It is just, it's honestly fascinating. It's like how not to release a game. Honestly, it's like everything that went wrong tenfold. And I think nowadays it's a bit better and there are people that enjoy it. So I don't want to, dunk on it too much and be like, oh, it's forever a terrible game. But I mean, let's face it, it really got off to a rocky start. And I mean, that's the same with games like No Man's Sky, Cyberpunk.
That's what I was going to say, though, right? All those games you mentioned have all gone on to be fantastic games, especially No Man's Sky. And I know you probably say it, but what I was going to go back to on the Fallout 76, though, is the thing with the collector's edition contents. I think people have got a right to be outraged by that, because that is
Oh,
what,
yeah.
that now is more costly than a lot of things. Collector's editions now, we're talking in the hundreds,
Oh, yeah.
right? And if you're putting a picture of something, that's what I'm going to expect to get. And did you ever see the recent? Well, when I say recent, it's a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. But the Marvel versus Capcom, the most recent edition of that, the
No, I don't think so.
collector's edition. If you have a
No.
look, the collector's edition came with the Infinity Stones. If you look at the promotional pictures for them, they looked amazing. They looked like gems glowing. When the actual game came out, they looked like painted eggs.
Oh, yeah, I'm looking
Can you
at
see
them
it?
now. They're like Fabergé eggs.
Well, if
Well,
they,
cheap
yeah,
Fabergé
yeah,
eggs.
I was going to say, yeah, yeah. But if you see what was promised, it's totally different. And I
Oh,
think
yeah.
people have got a right. Yeah, do you see it? People have got a right in that instance, I think, to complain.
But I mean, is that not illegal though? I mean, I know it obviously varies from country to country and there'll be loopholes, but surely that is illegal to falsely advertise these kind of things. Like, I mean, especially for, as we were saying, with the canvas bag, and I mean, the only other thing I can think of in terms of gaming, not so much for collector's editions, but I know Watch Dogs was very guilty for that, for overselling themselves, because they showed
Alien
you, like,
Colonial Marines, wasn't it?
well, Colonial Marines as well, but do you remember Watch Dogs, the
Yes.
hacker
Yeah.
game?
Yeah.
Yeah, where they ran it on a very high-end PC and you could see your reflection in puddles. It looked absolutely spectacular. It was going to be the next game and the next gen at the time. And then it came out, and it doesn't look overly bad, but compared to what they showed off, and again, same with Colonial Marines, that was another example where it's just false advertising. And I suppose for that, they have the excuse of, oh, it's not the final product, which I am so sick of seeing that disclaimer now. Where they're like, oh, it's not the final product. It's like, this game's going to be bad, isn't it? It's going to be terrible.
What I was going to say, though, with the games, I don't mind. Well, when I say I don't mind, that they can be patched and they can be fixed. I think as long as it's a day one patch and not a week, 2 month patch,
Yeah,
going back to the collector's editions, I can appreciate things might change. They might not. I don't want to say necessarily it's false advertising, and it might be that they couldn't match what they wanted to do. But the
mhm,
price of the edition never comes down or doesn't come
yeah.
down. It stays the same price. So that is where I've got the issue with it. And there was a Resident Evil one. It might be for 5 or 6. I remember it was. I think that was fine, but it was like £500 because it came with a leather jacket. I think it came with like Leon's leather jacket.
Oh, I remember that, yeah.
If we're talking about charging people this amount of money, anyway, I'm going on, but But the games, yeah, I think that is what's stopping me from mainly being a day one purchaser in recent years.
Oh no, absolutely. I actually remember when they used to put a lot of effort into the collector's editions. Like, I think I brought this up before, either on your show or mine, but I do remember when you had things like, for example, I've got the limited editions for the Gears of War games,
Yeah,
and they come with like a full art book, they come with a DVD about the making of the game, and especially for Gears of War 3, that is beautiful. It comes with the ceremonial case that came also with the metal gear that you actually got inside of
yes,
it. You got a
very
small
nice.
flag as well with the coalition. You just got so much stuff, and it was just so well detailed. And I always remember when Call of Duty came out again in 2019 for Modern Warfare, and I remember going on Amazon and being like, "Oh, I wonder what the collector's edition or the promotional stuff's going to be," because it used to be really cool things like the night vision goggles, the um, RCXD car, things like that. It's like, so what's it going to be this time? And it was the most horrific looking melted Captain Price figure, like a tiny
Yeah,
figure, and maybe a bag of Doritos thrown in for good measure. Same with Pokemon. Pokemon,
double
other than
XP.
yeah, like Pokemon as well, they put in like free Pokeballs or something in the game that's already cheap enough to buy. So you're like, well, what's the point? There's not as much emphasis, and I'm saying that, and I could be totally wrong, but it feels as if in certain franchises they're trying to get away with a lot more for a lot less.
I remember I used to get them when they kind of were quite cheap on online stores, and yeah, they were good. You would often get like a statuette thing with it. So one of the best ones I had was, I think it was Arkham. I can't remember if it's Arkham City. I think it would have been
Hmm.
Arkham City. But it came with a brilliantly collectible Batman figurine. It came with one of the animated films. It came with, yeah, like I said, a making of. I had a Fable one. But one of the best things I had, and it was the most simplest, I must have got one of the Call of Duty, not the ones which came with like the infrared goggles and etc. But and something my wife liked was it came with like a little, it looked like a weathered notebook. And
Oh,
that was just a really cool little thing to have. It's not anything grandiose or overly priced, but it's something that felt like it fit in with the game and was something you could use and was fairly good collectible. I mean, and the good thing about them back in the day, they actually came with the game,
oh
unlike
yeah.
a lot of them nowadays. I mean, have you seen that a lot of the collector's
Oh yeah.
editions now don't come with the game?
Well, funny enough, that actually relates to one of the other games I was going to bring up.
Okay.
Have you heard of Mighty Number 9 before?
Yeah. Oh, it was a
Yeah,
successor to Mega Man, was it?
yeah, it was
Yeah.
2013, I think, because at the time, Mega Man didn't have a new game, and I don't think it was until, and I could be wrong here, so if any of your listeners out there are Mega Man fans, yeah, pin the blame on me for this, but I think it
Yeah,
was,
complain to care of
yeah,
Chatsunami, yeah.
yeah. Please hate listen to my podcast, I beg you.
Yeah.
But at least leave a funny message before you hate the review. But I think it was 2018 that they actually had an official game come out for Mega Man, but at that point there was it was a real dry spell for Mega Man fans. So Mighty Number 9 came out. It was a very it
It was
it seemed
crowdfunded as well, I think, wasn't it?
yeah, oh yeah, 100%. And that's where the problems I think popped up, because I don't think it was until I want to say 2015 or 16 that it actually released, because they teamed up with Deep Silver to publish it. And it was a really cool idea at the time, but when they released when they released a lot of the advertising for it, there was a lot of controversy around that, mainly because, going back to your point, they had I think it was like either you could order an NES or Famicom box with
Oh, yes. Yeah.
um, the old school instructions in it. But the problem with that was they printed them too large, so they didn't even fit inside the box they were supposed to
Brilliant.
be for. And I
Brilliant.
don't think they even came with the game, because everyone ordered them digitally. And then, of course, when Deep Silver stepped in, they were going to do physical games. And then they said, well, we've paid for the digital. Can we just, transfer our pledge over to the physical? And they were saying, no, 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 no. And then, of course, there was the infamous trailer. Have you heard of this for
No.
it? Oh, well, basically, it showed you off the graphics, and the graphics were terrible. People compared the explosions to like cheese pizza and things like that. It was really weird, but the narrator for it was trying to be overly. In the 90s, you had like that cool dude, and oh, this is awesome.
Yeah.
Do you want to be the awesomest awesomeness of awesome? I'm not far off there. But one of the lines that stuck with a lot of people at the time was he said something along the lines of, you're going to make your, oh God, I hate this so much, you're going to make your enemies cry as hard as an anime fan on prom night. And I was like,
Oh man.
oh, that is not how you reel on a general audience.
Yeah, yeah. I do, yeah, I kind of do remember that now. It's funny, isn't it? Games are funny.
Oh, absolutely.
I tell you what, though, I do, because I feel like we could probably spend all night talking about then Cyberpunk and No Man's Sky.
Oh, yeah.
On Cyberpunk, sorry. Yeah, I
Mhm.
remember getting it because it was cheap on Amazon, but I remember then not playing it for about another 6 months because I was waiting for the fabled patch to come out. And even then, I played it recently, enjoyed it, but it was still quite buggy.
Oh, no,
Let's just say
same.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, I bought it, I think, a year after release, and this is when they were heralding it as like the next coming of gaming, that all the problems are fixed and forgiven. And I kid you not, I did the prologue mission, and other than the fact that whenever I tabbed out of the game, the whole game crashed, and I was like, oh, great. But, I could maybe chalk that up to a optimization issue. I'm like, okay, I'll forgive it for that. And I'm being very generous, I'll forgive it for that. But then I did the prologue, I did the introduction, and there's a bit, you've probably played it yourself, where it's where you wake up in Night City for the first time and you hear the radio announcer go, "Good morning, Night
Oh,
City,"
yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and you see your character go through all these like
Yes.
this
It's like
this
cutscenes,
secret,
isn't it? It's like flash.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's like a montage of what you're
Yeah.
doing. I
Yeah.
kid you not, when I got to the bit where they're just walking outside, one of the characters was T-posing and floating along. My character was floating without a head, T-posing as well. And I was like, this is a AAA game, the same people who made The Witcher, and it's 1 year on, and you're telling me they haven't patched something like this out. This is at the beginning of the game, by the way. This isn't like, oh, it's like 100 hours in, and it's like a weird deep corner that, you couldn't have found on your normal playthrough. This is at the very beginning that you can't avoid. So,
I do sometimes love a
yeah.
funny bug.
Oh, yeah.
I'm naming all the pods today. I was talking to Joey from Game Club Pod today, and we were talking, or it might have been yesterday, we were talking about the fact that even though I'm not a massive wrestling fan anymore, I still love playing the wrestling games. I get them when they're cheap, but I still like doing it. And for the last 2 or 3 iterations, they've got this bug in it where it's generally like if a character's got long hair, so it's often when you're playing one of the female characters with like a long ponytail. In the cutscenes, that ponytail seems to have a life of its own and it just starts flying everywhere. And it's in the last 2 or 3 games, and they still haven't patched it out. And I actually quite find it quite endearing now. It feels comforting when I get that bug in the WWE game. But you know what? I'm looking at the time. I'm going to apologize, but I'm going to move on to one of mine now. I'm going to merge two of mine, and you might have this anyway. It's kind of in and around DLC, as we've alluded to. Now, again, this first one is going to sound so mild now, but at the time it was just, I remember the outrage it caused, but it was in one of my all-time favorite games. And I feel quite bad because a couple of my favorite games are mentioned in these examples, but it was Oblivion, Elder Scrolls Oblivion,
Oh,
but it was the Horse Armour mod.
oh yeah. Back in the days where you would laugh at cosmetic DLC, and nowadays everybody embraces them.
Yeah, so I think this was in 2005. I think Microsoft said they were going to start introducing what was called then the new thing called microtransactions, or he'll never catch on.
No, never.
Yeah, they were going to introduce that into the console, the Xbox. And so this is 2006 now, so microtransactions were still relatively new. I don't think they were a big thing. And Bethesda were apparently the first third-party publisher to take Microsoft up on this idea. So what they offered was a pack of Horse Armour for Oblivion players for $2.50. So again, $2.50 isn't a lot by modern days or modern standards, but it resulted in an outcry from fans who found it too expensive. Now, you've got to remember, this was a single cosmetic item in a single player game that only you would ever see. So it's not even like a skin in a multiplayer game. Now, Todd Howard claimed Bethesda had tried to put the pack lower, but Microsoft insisted at the $2.50 price point. But regardless, it will be remembered as one of the earliest instances of a publisher charging players for what many felt should be in the game. But just to finish my bit off, it was actually quite popular in sales and was one of the best selling of, or best performing, of Bethesda's add-ons. Now, if you compare it to modern times where suit or armor skin in Destiny 2 costs $15, probably feels really innocuous now, but yeah, it was just a furore. It's like, how dare you charge me horse armor for $2.50?
It does seem so ridiculous to look back on it, though, and think that at least the gaming industry had some standards to reject it, but yeah, nowadays, as you said, it's all part and parcel of what you expect from a game nowadays.
Well, now you expect, yeah, as you said, spot on, you expect a game to have DLC, right? There was one game, what was it called? Is it Azura's Wrath? Which I actually liked. It was a game based on chapters, and a couple of chapters were actually sold as DLC. And I think chapters in the middle of the game, if I remember correctly, the actual true ending was paid DLC, which is unbelievable.
That's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, and just to throw this one at you as well, so we can talk a little bit about it. Did you know, or are you aware of Project $10, as it was called?
I don't think so.
Project $10 was basically, this was the early 2000s. Yeah, so it was around 2012, 2013. The big gaming companies, and by that, I kind of mean EA and Ubisoft, secondhand trading was massive. It still is now, but you'd go into Game or GameStop in the States, trade in a game, buy another one, and then obviously the booming secondhand sales was getting more and more and more. So companies were thinking, right, how do we get some of that action? Because you can't ban the resale of games. So what EA started to do was put in some content that was, it was like DLC. So basically you would get a code in the game. So one of the first ones, and again, this is what I'm saying, Mass Effect 2, and you know how much I love Mass Effect, right? That came with, I can't remember if it was all games or the collector's edition, but it came with something called the Cerberus network, and you had a code that would download a number of DLC items. But if you then bought that game secondhand, you wouldn't get that. You would then have to pay $10 to get it downloaded.
That is insane, isn't it?
Same with Dragon Age Origins, which is another game I loved. It came with a code for quite a decent DLC side bit to it called the Stone Prisoner. That was actually quite a good, from my memory, quite a good bit of DLC. But again, if you bought the game secondhand without the code in it, you wouldn't get that. You'd have to pay $10 to get it. But it then evolved into sports titles. So I think what they were then looking at was ultimately to be online. It then became an online pass. So for, say, for Call of Duty, for FIFA, Tiger Woods, NBA, you would have to have one of these codes to get online. If not, it was a one-time off, $10 purchase. But to be able to have some of the online accessibility, you would have to pay this $10. On the EA Sports website, Senior VP of Worldwide Development said that even the harshest critic couldn't argue that paying for online services was unfair. In order to continue to enhance the online experiences that attracting nearly 5 million game sessions a day, we think it's fair to get paid for the services we provide to them. He also denied that the move was intended to stamp out second-hand sales, saying that EA viewed the pre-owned market as an opportunity. Now, just to finish this story off, Opponents contended that adoption of online pass systems may lead to the removing of more essential functionality from used games and possibly even preventing the resale of video games. Now, 38 Studios founder Kurt Schilling, that was the Kingdoms of Amalur game, he justified the use of an online pass to unlock the 7-part bonus quest as day one DLC. Now, this was day one DLC, which even then, I'll come on to with again one of my other favourite games. I think day one DLC is just as bad as anything, or it used to be just as bad. But on this one, 2013, they started phasing it out. The outroar became too much, the criticism became too much, and EA actually started retroactively removing this from some of their sports games. So, and what I was saying about the day one DLC, Mass Effect 3, again, one of my favourites, that had some day one DLC called From Ashes.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
A character in it who, for me, if you're into the game and the lore of the game, is, I would say, is actually a vital character. Can you play it without it? Absolutely. But having that character in felt like it should have been in the game rather than DLC. Now, with the Legendary Edition, you get all the DLC, but the day one DLC that feels like it's just cut out of the game to then get a cost or a fee later down the line just feels out of order, doesn't it?
It is weird when they try to solve a solution that's not really there. Well, the problem's not really there, and they're like, "Oh, I've got a solution for this," and you're like, "Well, it wasn't really a problem." Like going back to what you were saying about the pre-owned issue, it's weird to think that back then they tried to do the Project $10 and that didn't work. But then, do you remember the release for I think it was the Xbox One in 2015, 2016, and they weren't going to let you actually
Yes.
trade or
Yeah.
use pre-owned copies, and you had to be on the internet all the time. And then they stupidly shot themselves in the face by saying, "Oh, if you don't want to go online, get an Xbox 360." And that is one thing that I think you should never ever do. See, when you're selling a game, even when you're selling a product, you do not insult, no matter how tempting it is, you do not insult your consumer base. And that's exactly what they did. Same with Diablo, but that was a whole other thing. When the guy on the stage said, "Oh, do you not want to play this?
Oh,
Like
yes. Yeah.
this game? Do you guys not have phones?" And I was like,
Yeah.
"This is this is just a PR nightmare." Whether they wanted to be cool and hip or whatever, but no, I know what you mean. It seems like a lot of companies did try that for a while. They were giving you kind of jigsaw games that they weren't going to give you the full thing. They were going to give you most of it and then say, "Oh, we've got bits and pieces," which, ironically enough, is what happened with the latest Call of Duty, where it was supposed to be DLC. I'm convinced it was supposed to be DLC, and then they said, "Now let's slap a $70 price tag on it and yeah,
I
sell it
know
as a
your
full."
views on that. Yeah.
Oh, I'll get to it. I'll be very
But
concise about it, but I will get to it.
do you know what, right, though? That Project $10 for the online pass, right? Part of me, even then, I can understand that, I guess.
Mhm.
Can I? I think I could. I couldn't necessarily forgive it, but I could understand it because yeah, people are constantly playing on the servers and they're not getting anything from that. I get it. But to add it into gaming content, that
Yeah.
felt wrong, especially if a lot of it is either key elements to it. I mean, if you're asking people to pay for skins and cosmetics, fill your boots. If you do that and you're happy buying that, I'm happy for you. And if the company are making money for that, but it felt like core elements or gameplay feels like it shouldn't have been included in that, that's how it started.
I mean, I think, and it's been years since I played it, but I'm pretty sure one of the Crackdown games did a similar thing where you'd be traversing the open world and then you'd drop down and it'd be like, "Oh, you can't play this mission because you've not bought the DLC." And it's like, what the hell? I mean, even with, again, sorry, swinging back to Call of Duty, but I think even with some of the older games, there were granted there were optional missions and they weren't like missions tied into the main story or anything, but even then they were trying to lock away certain missions, and that meant that you couldn't complete the game with your achievements. You know,
Right.
you couldn't get 100% on your achievements without buying this DLC. So it's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, so I think for me to sum up, I'm not saying DLC bad. I'm not saying at all.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Some DLC is brilliant. I generally, if I love a game, I will get the DLC for it. I'm not one for skins and cosmetics, mainly because I just don't change it that much on a character. Default character, let's go.
Yeah.
But again, if you're happy with that, I know some people love tailoring their characters to the nth degree. I'm not saying DLC bad. I'm just saying it should be DLC. It shouldn't be cut from the game. And yeah, if it's day one stuff, why not, let people have that within the game? But just something I wanna finish on this point is I've joked about it, and I'm sure I've joked about it on here, and probably people have, but we were saying you wouldn't get DLC elsewhere or these kind of practices elsewhere, like a book. Oh, imagine if you had it with a book. Well, Project $10, the online pass, a similar thing apparently has been used by textbook publishers, which I found out when I was looking into this, right?
Really?
By requiring the use of an online pass to offer supplemental content, including an online message board, an assignment system where homework may be assigned or handed in, or even an ebook version of the title. It's similarly intended to discourage the second-hand resale or sharing of textbooks by only allowing the online functionality to be utilized by a single student, requiring others to buy their own copy of the book or obtain an access code individually. So there we go. It is in textbooks. That joke is no longer a joke now.
I just want to say, if you're buying my book, you get the whole thing. There's no paywalls, no nothing. If you want to pay for the digital edition, it's going to be all there. And if there's a piece missing, please feel free to ask me.
It'll
For,
never catch on. A complete book in one? No.
I know, imagine.
Okay, sorry. Over to
No,
you.
no.
Over to you.
So a couple of really just, I can sum this up really in just one umbrella term, and it's more or less pure advertising and things that have had to be changed either post release, or they've had to try to do some damage control. So for example, there was the Hitman game, I think it was Blood Money, I could be wrong on that, but they had an advert of it was quite horrific. It was like a dead woman in a bathtub or something, and their line was like, "Oh, so deadly" or something like that. And that caused controversy. The Left 4 Dead 2, the cover art had to be changed because of, well, do you remember the Left 4 Dead 2 controversy? Well, I say controversy, but it was a minor one, all things considered.
Was that the collectible figure in the collector's edition? Or is that something
No,
else?
it might be something else. The one I'm
Okay, no.
thinking of is the hand. So in the first game, I think the hand has like 4 digits and then the thumb's missing. So it's supposed to be, left for dead. Haha, funny
Yeah.
kind of cover. But for the second one, in I think America and other places, the hand was like facing the camera with 2 fingers up. Now, for all
Oh,
the Americans out there, you'll have no idea. You'll think, what's wrong with that? But yeah, for us sturdy Brits, we'll know. Yeah, it's a very offensive symbol to give to someone. It's basically like giving the middle finger, but it's more a jovial swear, let's say. So yeah, that was promptly changed. So that's why I
I
said it was
never
a bit
knew
of a
that one. No.
yeah, it was really interesting because I remember it popping up in news articles, and obviously I think they made a bigger deal of it than it actually was, because all they had to do was just orient the hand round. So, it was as if it was giving the peace sign rather than, telling you to do something that you
Yeah,
shouldn't really be
yeah,
doing.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
but I mean, the only other one, and this is where I get into Call of Duty, and don't get me wrong, this is my last point, but have you heard of basically the way that Call of Duty controversy baits people? Like, have you seen the long list of things they do?
Is this outside of things like No Russian or including that?
Oh no, including, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah,
So
yeah.
it's like within the world of the games themselves, because in apologies for any spoilers here, but for I think it was for Modern Warfare 1, the 2006 version, they had like a nuclear bomb go off. And don't get me wrong, that was a shocking moment, but at the same time it was very much in a combat situation, so you thought, well, it's within context. And then, of course, No Russian came out, where you played the role of basically a terrorist in an airport. That was absolutely lambasted at the time. But I think because of No Russian, that's when Call of Duty started to think, hold on a second, we can actually use controversy to draw more people in. And it kept getting worse for the controversial moments. Like, it was very gratuitous after that, because in Modern Warfare 3 you had a child essentially getting blown up by like this van. Well, you don't really see it, you just see the puff of smoke and you drop the camera. In other games you saw just like
That's right.
brutal
That was in
violence.
London. That was in London,
Yeah,
wasn't it? Yeah,
that's the
yeah,
one. Yeah.
yeah.
In the Black Ops series, you had brutal violence. One of my least favourite ones was Black Ops 3, where you literally get dismembered by this robot for no reason. You just get your arms and legs ripped off, and you're like, why is this a decision in the game? You've got your press F to pay respects. That's the most infamous one. You actually had the reboot of Modern Warfare banned in Russia because they blamed them in the game for a war crime that was actually committed by Allied forces instead of them. Did you hear about that as well?
No, I
It
hadn't.
was
No.
it was shocking. It was basically it was a tragic thing where I think in this particular conflict they bombed civilians who were trying to flee, but of course in the game they had a very similar thing where they were like, "Oh, this time it's the Russians that did it," and that obviously caused controversy in Russia, and they said they weren't going to sell the game and things. So I feel as if they're continuing to stoke people to be like, "Oh, how far can we get away with this?" Because again, there's a lot of gratuity in it, but no substance. It's like you see a lot of, and this sounds horrible to say, but it's like, when people play violent video games or they watch violent films, and you get desensitized to it at times. Like, I mean, I have to admit, I thought I was desensitized, and then I saw a rather horrible, like horror series. I was like, "Yep, nope, still got it, still human." But especially for these games, you do get you just go through them. It's a bit like one of my friends jokes about the Uncharted series, where they try to make Nathan Drake a hero, and then during the game you're gunning down like hundreds of people, but then you get to the cutscene and he's like, "No, I'll never kill anyone. I'm a better man." And you're like, well, hold on a second here. But of course, the most recent thing for Call of Duty, at least, is the Modern Warfare 3 series, where I got really angry at it after saying, usually I give Call of Duty like you just shrug it off and think, it's Call of Duty being Call of Duty, they're selling the same thing. But basically they repackaged a lot of assets from the previous game, because again, it's this idea of crunch culture with their staff. They wanted to get a game out as quickly as possible. They wanted to bait fans in with the nostalgia factor. So they said, "Oh, this is Modern Warfare 3. We've got similar story beats, similar characters." But I think that's probably the tipping point for a lot of Call of Duty fans. But it's actually quite surprising to see that's how far they've managed to get away with these controversial things. And they just keep prodding, and then it's going to blow up in their face eventually. Yeah.
For me, absolutely, I can't disagree with anything you said, really. I mean, going back to the first one, the nuclear weapon one, I think is still a great piece of gaming in the sense of it was shocking. You don't often get games where you as the protagonist get killed. So that felt shocking. Some people might still think that's tasteless, but I thought within the context of that game, it worked. But then when you get to something like No Russian, which is just gratuitous, really. And I know there's an option. I think that's how they get away to say, do you want to not see this? Well,
Yeah.
most people aren't going to click that, are they? And there was the same in another game, wasn't there? A torch scene where you capture someone and they're in a container, and you've got the option to go in there and be part of the interrogation, or you could stand outside.
Yeah, that's the reboot of Modern Warfare, the 2019 one, yeah.
And I'm like, I just think those two things, by including that, just feels gratuitous because you're asking then the player to take part in that, and it's extended. For me, it's similar to GTA 5 and the torture
Oh,
sequence
yes.
in that. I could do without that. I'm not against, I will play the violent games. So people say Call of Duty is violent, Grand Theft Auto is violent, absolutely. But there's something really distasteful for me about those scenes.
Yeah. Because, I mean, don't get me wrong, Call of Duty is not the only game to do this right enough. I mean, you cited, of course, GTA. It feels as if they do target easy, and this sounds so horrible to say, but easy demographics for these kind of things. Like, for example, as I said in Modern Warfare 3, the original, you take the perspective of a father with his wife and his daughter, and the daughter runs ahead, and then, of course, the bomb goes off. And, that's obviously like a group of people who are completely innocent. And, of course, even going as far back to No Russian, those were completely unarmed civilians that you're not supposed to gun down, but, you take part in those atrocities. And even in the reboot as well, there's quite a lot of killing like that. Like they show you the NPCs lying lifelessly in the ground, but at the same time they're clipping into the ground and things. So you're kind of like, oh, if you're going to shock me, don't half arse. But it's just the fact. It's just that symbol though of, oh look, innocence. They might as well show you a picture of a puppy and then be like, oh yeah, at 3:15 this puppy was shot dead, now we have to invade this country. And you're like, whoa, hold on. It's controversy for controversy's sake,
Exactly. And I
sorry.
think Call of Duty can get away with it because it's got such a massive following. Some other games don't have the luxury of being like so massively played. Now, the
Mm-hmm.
thing for me that I find really difficult with the No Russian is it is a really, in terms of the game, the plot, it's a really clever twist at the end to it.
Yeah.
It's the scene, they make it playable. Maybe it could have been shorter, maybe it could have been, it cuts to the end of it rather than the
Mm-hmm.
beginning bit. It's the scene itself rather than the twist in it. And yeah, the Modern Warfare 3, the London one, I can't remember how it when it came out in relation to events that were happening in the world as well. But like
Yeah.
I think Modern Warfare 3 had like Piccadilly Circus, didn't it? And it was modeled on the real one, and that felt real to people here after certain events had happened in London. And I think they knew what they were doing
Oh yeah.
when they're doing it. And when you add in a child into it, like I said, I think it just almost makes you roll your eyes now because you're thinking they are now trying too hard to do that next shocking moment, but without pushing the people too far in terms of them walking away from it.
Because I mean, even in the latest game, and slight spoilers, I suppose, for the new Modern Warfare 3, but they, of course, are trying to capitalise on nostalgia. And I think that generates a lot of controversy where they say, oh, do you remember this thing from the last game? And because the
Right.
last game is so much better, that people are going to be quite irked that you're almost forsaking their name on behalf of like this inferior product. But they have their own semi version of No Russian, but it's very, it's not as graphic. It's still absolutely horrific, but it's not as graphic as No Russian from Modern Warfare 2. And it's basically you're in the boots of this like former freedom fighter, and the plane gets hijacked, and basically you have to fight your way through the plane, and then you end up getting a bomb strapped to your chest. And you don't really see, not that I'm saying that, oh, you should see close up the devastation, but it feels like a very throwaway moment, because they do try to make it as horrific as possible with, you're trying to get the phone to turn off the bomb, and all these passengers are like scrambling, trying to stop you from getting there. And then as soon as the bomb goes off, it's like, that's it, that's the next scene. That's back to the action, and you have to recover like the black box and everything. So it becomes very inconsequential. Like the whole point of No Russian was, at least in the context of the story, was it was supposed to kickstart World War III, which, as silly as that concept was at the time in this game, it was still contextual. You know, I don't necessarily agree with it when I'm
The
older.
twist at the end worked for me. I'm
Yeah.
happy to be shocked. I just don't like the gratuitous bit that
Oh,
came
yeah.
before it. That's the issue. Like I said, I think it's a great plot point or the end of it, you know, and well, basically, we might as well, it's not spoiling it because it's older than some of the games we talked about.
Yeah.
You are an undercover, I think it's an American soldier in
Yeah.
that separatist gang, aren't you, that mows down innocents in an airport. And then at the end, they knew all along you were an American undercover. They shoot you. And so it looks like an American has gone on Russian soil, isn't it? To create this, which then triggers off the event. So it's a great plot point, but it's the and the way they animated some of the civilians in the airport, that it's to that degree as well. Do you know what I mean? So they knew exactly
Yeah.
what they were doing. For me, it felt like it could have been a different way. I'm happy to be shocked. I just don't like the gratuitous elements of it.
Do you know, it's funny because I remember at the time this was all over the news. Like, this dominated the news. But nowadays, it doesn't seem as if gaming controversies really command as much attention, really. I mean, there are, obviously, when they're half baked games and they've got the controversies themselves, they're more, if it makes sense, it's more isolated to the gaming side of the internet and the more gaming news and things. It's kind of rare to think now that a mainstream media source will say, like the BBC or something, will say, "Oh, look at this game. Oh, they are doing this or that," and maybe they do, but it's not as prominent as it
It's all
used to
been
be.
done. It's all been done
Yeah,
before, hasn't it?
I know. I mean, as soon as you go to No Russian, like, where'd
Yeah,
you go from
yeah.
it? It reminds me of one of my friends who played the Outlast games.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
he said he absolutely hated the second one because, and obviously without going into detail, there's like a very horrible, gratuitous thing that can happen to you if you're caught by the enemy. And he basically turned around and went, "Well, now that's happened to me, where'd you go from here?" And, it's the same with
It's
these games. It's
true.
like, well,
It's true.
you've had your No Russian of the generation. Where,
Yeah.
where are you supposed to go? Yeah.
I think I want to call an end to or start wrapping up here, which is a
Oh,
shame
yeah.
because I'm having such a great time talking to you. But just out of curiosity, did you have many more things left? Because if you do, I can feel a part two coming up.
Um, I don't have any for this one, I have to say.
Okay, okay. No, if we
Because
got through everything, that's good.
yeah,
I just wanted to make sure you didn't
yeah.
have anything left on the plate. The only other thing, and I'm going to say it really briefly, I had was loot boxes.
Oh, yeah.
And you know something bad when I found Nightcall. There's a whole load of information on the Parliament website because obviously they did I think it was in 2016. They did a massive thing on this because they considered it a potential risk to children as a wider review of gambling. And basically, that you can have a look at it there. They thought in 2019, loot box market was worth £700 million just in the UK alone, and
Oh,
they
wow.
did identify. Basically, I think they did say that there was stable and consistent association between loot box use and problem gambling. So yeah, I mean that's probably a conversation for another day. But loot boxes were and still are kind of like the thing, weren't they? From FIFA to even Call of Duty, I guess. Well, that seems to crop up in all these conversations, doesn't it?
Because, I mean, they also used to have, like, the quintessential example I always remember was Overwatch, and I think they got rid of them
Yes, yeah,
for battle passes and a storefront, which I'll never get over the fact that every game now has to be like Warzone and
yeah,
and,
yeah.
but I mean, yeah.
We could probably come back to this in the new year, and I
Oh,
think
yeah.
we probably should.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I was actually surprised you didn't mention the um, a particular collectible that you got me to Google before we came on.
Oh no! Let's say because what was the one? What's the famous one? Is it Dead? No, is it Dead Island? Is it Dead Island?
I'm sure it's Dead Island, yeah, where it's the literal and metaphorical bust of a torso. Yeah, is
Yeah,
that the one you're thinking of? Yeah,
basically, and
yeah.
everyone knows about that. But I was just googling like controversial collector's editions or things like that, and I came across one I'd never seen before, and I sent it to you, and your reaction on Twitter was just brilliant. It was for Fear 3, and it's Alma, isn't it? It's like
Yeah.
because obviously if you play the game, but she's pregnant, and so her stomach it was almost like a glowing green, wasn't it? But obviously she is looking very elongated, very emaciated, and it is just a horrific piece, isn't it?
I don't know who you would buy that for or why you would buy that. And the example I gave to you was when I was at a Comic Con like a
Yeah,
good several years ago, and I was looking, because I'm a Twin Peaks fan, I was looking for a Dale Cooper Funko. And then all of a sudden the guy turned around and was like, "Oh, do you want a Laura Palmer one?" And I was like, "Oh, well, let's see it." And for those of you who don't know, it's a murder mystery show where, this very poor, unfortunate teenage girl gets murdered and they have to figure it out. And the body at the beginning of the series is found wrapped in plastic. And some person at Funko thought, "Do you know what we're going to do here? We're going to sell a Funko of the body wrapped in plastic." And I just thought, there is not enough money for me to display that and then have to explain every single time why the hell you would have something like that in your house. And I cannot imagine the conversations you would have with Alma, a pregnant demon creature on your shelves. I don't get it.
terrible looking.
It
It
just,
is. It
oh,
gave me
I,
nightmares. Gave me
I
nightmares.
I genuinely thought the Dead Island one was the worst I'd ever seen until you broke that illusion. So thank you.
Well, I'm
Thank you
glad
for
I'm
showing me the
glad I
light.
could do that. I'm glad I could do that for you. Look, as I said, I'm really sorry for ending the conversation. I could
Oh,
talk to
not
you
at
all
all.
night.
No.
I love talking to you. I love having you on. Do you just want to shout out your socials before we wrap up?
Yeah, sure. So if you want to check out more content from myself or our collab episodes as well, because we've done As Dusk Falls and, of course, the interview with yourself, because that was a long time coming as well. Yeah, you can check us out on the website chatsunami.com, as well as all good podcast apps. Just look for the Red Panda under the name Chatsunami, and yeah, we'll see you there. But yeah, once again, thank you so much for inviting me on. It's honestly a pleasure coming back.
It's great having you on. And if you are one of the few, because I can't believe there are many of you that aren't subscribed to Chatsunami, do so after listening to this, because yeah, it's a great podcast. And as you've heard, Satsu is just a great individual. So thank you for coming on. From me, well, you're listening to me, so you should know where to get me. On socials, just look for Casting Views or at Casting Views across all social media platforms, and you'll find me. If you want to be on the show, if you want to give me any ideas for episodes that you think would be good, just drop me a note there. Or if you just want to say hi, I'll say hi back. And do you know what? I'm going to bring back a catchphrase I haven't used for a long time before we see the episode out. So I know there's a lot of podcasts from which you can choose. So I thank you for listening to Casting Views.
1, 2, 3, 4. If I want your opinion, I will give it to you. Come on, take what we've got